Hey everybody, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Emily McGonigle and welcome to my first official video for my newly launched brand, Emily McGonigle Retouch. Today I'm going to be retouching a photo taken by my good friend Matthew Simmons on a shoot that he did with the lovely Madi Clark, who's also a photographer and also very good at what she does, so you should check both of them out. I will put links at the end of this video as well as in the comment section of this video. Today I wanted to just go over some basic retouching with you guys, go over my basic workflow, go over some of the techniques and tools that I use, and I'll be letting you know what those are as the video progresses. I'll also have little captions letting you know what everything is as well in the video. But if you guys have any questions by the end of it, go ahead and leave comments in the video with your questions, or you can email me or leave them in the comment section of my blog, however you want to reach out. I'm more than happy to answer questions. I'm here to help you guys learn what it is that I do and kind of my workflow so that you can take that and apply it to your own work. So let's go ahead and get started and retouch this image of Madi Clark done by Matthew Simmons. Okay, so here we have the image of Madi that we are going to be retouching today. And as you can see, it's already been color graded by Matthew to his liking, so I'm not going to do a whole lot with that there. He just asked that I do some general cleanup on this image. That's what I'm going to do today. Madi has really great skin, so really all I'm looking at here are things like this area that's really just accentuated more by the way the light is flowing, and it's not so much her skin, if that makes sense. She has really, really good skin. So just little things we're going to be looking at, just cleaning up little things like this, that shadowed area that I pointed out before, making her eyes pop a little bit more. Yeah, and then just getting rid of like little scratches like this, another little scratch right here. So I'm basically just going to go through this image and clean up all those little things that I see. I want it to still look very much like her, obviously. I want it to look more natural, not super plasticky. In general, I don't like to make my images look overly retouched unless there's a specific artistic reason for doing so, like the client intentionally wants to look plastic, or we're going for a more fantasy, unrealistic kind of feel. But for this is very much something we want to keep natural and realistic. So let's go ahead and get started on this. So the first thing we're going to do is work on the tiny little blemishes that Madi has. There aren't many, but we're going to create a new heel layer, and I'm going to use the healing brush tool, not to be confused with the spot healing tool. We're just using the healing brush tool. This allows us to sample a specific area rather than allowing the content aware fill to work. I'm going to resize the brush itself to the exact size of the blemish that I'm working on. So I'm going to be constantly resizing, constantly sampling, working on the very few tiny blemishes that Madi has, working just on texture at this point, not on anything tonal. So I'm going to be ignoring that shadowed area I pointed out earlier and just working on the little texture inconsistencies that we find. So as you can see, Madi has a little bit of a laugh line. I actually don't want to take this out completely because, like I said before, I don't want to over retouch the image. I want to keep it as natural as possible. And I feel like leaving something like that in kind of adds to the character of the image and makes her still look more realistic. So what I'm going to do is take my healing brush and sample above the laugh line and completely take it out. Then I'm going to go under Edit, Fade Healing Brush, and then I'm just going to drop the opacity of that last stroke that I made with the healing brush to bring the laugh line back just a little bit. So it's still there, but it's not as prominent. So now that I've gone through the image with the healing brush tool and taken care of everything I wanted to take care of with that, I'm going to dodge and burn the image using 2 different curve layers. So I'm going to create 2 different curve layers, and I'm going to go ahead and group them together. And I'm going to name them something like curves, dodge and burn, just so I know what that group is. And on that first curve layer, I'm going to take the curve by the center mid-tone point and pull it down, and then set it to luminosity. And then I'm going to do the opposite for the top curve layer. I'm going to set that to luminosity as well, and then pull it up by the midtones. And this is going to give me my dodge and burn layers. And then what I'm going to do is completely mask them out, so that way I can paint back in more subtly what it is that I want. Then I'm going to go ahead and label my bottom layer as curves burn, and then the top layer will be curves dodge. So the next thing I'm going to do is create a group of layers that's going to help me kind of see what I'm working with a little bit better. I'm going to create a curves layer first and set the blending mode to color. And then after I've set the blending mode, I'm going to take the black point and pull it all the way to the top. Sorry, I accidentally set the blending mode to luminosity. I meant to send it to color. This turns the image to a true black and white tone image. And then I'm going to create a curves layer and pull the midpoint down to darken the image and kind of give it a little bit more contrast so I can really see the areas that need attention. I'm going to also set this blending mode for this layer to luminosity. And I'm just going to name it darken so that I know which is which. I'll group them together and call the group help. This group of layers is strictly to help me with this step. It's not something that will be applied to the final image. So when I feel I'm done with it, I'll either delete it or I'll just simply turn it off. And this is a technique that I've actually learned from another retoucher. His name is Victor Fages. I am 90% sure I'm pronouncing his last name incorrectly, so please forgive me for that. But it was from a class that I took, one of his from Creative Live, so it's been pretty helpful for me. So first thing I'm going to do is select the dodge layer that I created, and I have a very soft brush, 0% softness, my opacity is at 100%, my flow is at 5%, and I'm using a Wacom tablet, so I have the pressure sensitivity turned on as well. And what I'm going to do is just paint in the areas that I feel need dodging. There's another dodge and burn technique that I use later that's different from this one. This one I like in this phase of retouching because what it's doing is helping to smooth the tones in the image, as well as kind of smooth some of the areas where the light doesn't transition from light to dark as smoothly as it could. Whereas the other technique I'm going to show you later, I use more for light sculpting. The other reason I like using this one in this phase of retouching is because it doesn't affect the tones like the other technique I use later does, because both of the blending modes for each layer set to luminosity, so it's only affecting the luminosity of the image, whereas the technique I use later will use overlay and soft light blending modes. When I'm ready to burn, I just simply click on the bottom layer for burn, and I paint in all the areas I want to burn. This takes a little bit of a learning curve, just remembering to not flip back and forth between the brush color between black and white, but to actually change the layer that I'm working on. So it's a little bit more time consuming than some other dodge and burn techniques, but it's a little bit more precise in my opinion. So I can turn this on and off and you can see what I've done so far. And this is what it looks like with the help layers turned off. So you can see the difference there. And I will occasionally turn off the help layers just to make sure that I'm on the right track with everything. Sometimes I see things with the help layers turned off better, and other times I see it with the help layers turned on. I normally work this way with the help layers turned on, but it's still helpful to turn it off and take a look at what you're working on. And now that I've done all the dodging and burning that I want to do in this step, I'm going to go ahead and merge up my layers and do inverted high pass next. So to do this, I go up to Filter, Other, High Pass. And I'm going to, in multiples of 3, try and find a number that affects the areas that I'm looking at with the most contrast before it stops changing at all. So in this case, I'm looking at the area below her eye and nose and kind of into her chin as well. And I'm flipping back and forth between 12 and 15 to see which one is most appropriate. And 15 doesn't change that area too much, so I think 12 is going to be a good setting. And once you find the number you're looking for, you take that number, divide it by 3, and then that's what you're going to set your Gaussian blur to. Command I to invert your layer, go up to Filter, select Gaussian blur. In this case, we're going to use 4 because 12 divided by 3 is 4. Set the blending mode to vivid light, and we apply it to that same inverted high pass layer. Once you do that, you're going to completely mask out that layer, because then what we're going to do is take our brush and paint in the areas that we want to smooth out. In this case, my brush is still at 0% softness. My opacity is a little bit lower than it was previously, but my flow is much higher. I'm still using pen pressure. These settings are mostly preferences. This is just what works for me, I've found. And I'll flip the layer on and off several times just to make sure that I'm not overdoing it or that I just haven't missed an area. So now each area of skin is going to have a different high pass setting. So her face is going to be much different than her arm, for example. So I'm going to merge up one more time just to keep myself organized. I like to put each area or each body part into its own group. So I've put face into its own group, and now I'm working on arm. Still in multiples of 3, I'm trying to find which number affects the areas I'm looking at the greatest. It looks like 18 is going to do it for me this time. And in this case, I'm going to drop the opacity on that layer. I'm going to set it to about 75 or so. And this changes to taste depending on the photo. I just didn't want to leave it at 100 because that was a little too much. I'm going to merge up another layer, and I'm looking at the tones that are a little bit wider spread on her arm. So I'm going to be looking at a bigger radius number here to try and smooth out those tones a little bit more. And I'm going to go ahead and drop that bottom arm layer as well and kind of bring back some more of the smaller textures that we initially smoothed out. So that layer ends up at 65%. And then something that I like to do is take the overall body part layer and still drop the opacity again, because it's dropping the 2 layers together at the same ratio. So the group ends up at around 80% to keep it smooth but realistic. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and work on Madi's eyes, and once again, I'm going to merge up all of my layers into a new layer, and I'm going to take my marquee tool and just select a square box around her eye area. I'm going to delete all of the area around that, so I'm going to invert my selection and then delete, and then set the layer to screen. And then I'm going to take a mask and then take a black brush and at 100% opacity and flow with no pressure sensitivity applied, I'm just going to mask out every area of that box except for her eye sockets, essentially just all the areas immediately around her eyes. So under her eye, the bottom part of her eyelid, underneath her eyebrows. And what this is going to do is just kind of brighten them up a little bit. She looks like a raccoon right now, but this is just so I can see where I'm painting in. I'm going to go ahead and take the opacity, drop it all the way down to 0, and then bring it back up slowly until I see just a little bit of light brought to her eyes, but not so much that it looks unnatural. So about 12 in this case. Then what I'm going to do is merge up into a new layer. I'm going to take my actual dodge tool and set it to midtones, or shadows actually is going to work better here. And then I have the exposure set to 20, and I'm just going to paint in around her pupil to bring a little bit more pop to her eyes. You can kind of see that there. Then I'm going to switch to midtones and pull out some of those midtones there. Not a lot of midtones, but there's some. And if this were a lighter image where I could see more definition in the actual color of her eye, I would probably do the same thing with the burn tool as well to give it more contrast. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and take the opacity of that layer, drop it down, and pull it back up so that there's some vibrancy to her eyes and a little bit of poppiness, but that it still looks natural. So about 40% for this one. Then I'm going to merge up again and take my sharpen tool and set that to luminosity, again, strength at 20, just a personal preference, and I'm going to sharpen her eye area and then drop the opacity on that as well so that it doesn't look unnaturally sharp, but that it's a little bit more crisp. We'll create a new blank layer and call it under eye heel. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my clone stamp tool. It's set at 0% softness, 70% opacity, and I don't want any pressure sensitivity here. I'm just going to go ahead and kill the dark circles underneath her eyes by sampling from the lighter areas on the top of her cheek there. Not being super precise because I'm going to go ahead and take some of that back out. I'm going to switch to my eraser tool and take away any that may have gotten into her actual eye. And then I'm going to take that layer and I'm going to drop it down and same as before, bring it back up slowly until it looks natural, but it has a lightened effect on that area. Okay, I'm going to just group these all together, call it eyes. And I'm actually going to put all of these things that I've done into a group called Retouch so I can flip it on and off. And you can see what I've done here as I turn this on and off from the very beginning of this video up until now. Okay, so this is looking pretty good for me, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next technique, which is light sculpting using the dodge and burn technique I was talking about earlier. I'm going to go ahead and create a new blank layer, set the blending mode to soft light, and then check the box to fill it with 50% gray. And I'm just going to call this layer soft for now. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. Command J on a Mac does that. I'm going to call this layer hard, and I'm going to set the blending mode to overlay. And the difference between these two layers is that the soft layer using soft light blending mode is not going to be as harsh of an effect as the overlay layer will be. So I'm going to go ahead and take my soft brush again, set my opacity to about 70 and my flow to 100 with the pressure sensitivity on my Wacom pen turned on. And this is going to be a really dramatic effect that you're going to see here. I'm definitely not going to leave everything this obvious, but once again, I'm doing it at a high visibility so that I can see what I'm doing as I'm working. So this is a lot like contouring for the ladies that know what that is. Maybe some of the guys too. And I'm just taking my brush and I'm flipping back and forth between white and black black for burn, white for dodge, and I'm putting highlights where I want the areas to pop out, like the tops of her cheekbones and her forehead, and I am burning where I want there to be a little bit more shadow definition. And I can flip this layer on and off and you'll see what I've done. And it's obviously a lot, so I'm going to go ahead and drop the opacity all the way down to 0 and bring it back up to a level that achieves the light sculpting that I was going for, but isn't so drastic that it's completely unrealistic. Now on the hard layer, I'm going to put things on here like highlights on the lips and some highlights in the eyes, because the effect of the overlay blending mode is a little bit more intense than soft light. It gives these areas just a little bit more pop. If I wanted to highlight her hair, this is the layer I would also do it on as well, but I don't really think that this image calls for that, so I'm not going to do that. And you can see what I've done with both of these layers. And here's the whole retouch one more time. And that's everything we want to do with this image. So we'll go ahead and save it and send it off to Matthew and to Maddie, and hopefully they like what we've done with it. So there you have it. Since this was my first video, I'd love to know what you guys thought. Let me know if you guys have any questions or if there was anything you really liked or anything that you thought could be presented better. And also let me know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future. I really value your feedback because it helps me decide which direction to take things in future videos and blog posts. Thanks again for watching, and until next time.